It's really nice to see this great group. I just quickly want to say that I am a fourth generation settler on Treaty 6 and Homeland of the Métis. My ancestors are from Norway, and I grew up in southern Saskatchewan on Treaty 4 territory. I'm happy, really excited and honored to be an ally and accomplice on the NEIHR. Clicker. Let's see. I'm aware it's only 10 minutes. I've already used one. I want to tell you a little bit about an exciting project that stems back to 2016 in the amazing community of Pelican Arrows in northern Saskatchewan. This is an effort to increase access to care for chronic back pain in northern communities in a way that's community directed and led. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we did the engagement, the planning, and the evaluation in a community-directed way, and then a little snippet about what we've learned about virtual care and remote presence and how it has been working to enhance access to care for a very common condition. So we know that in Canada, at least 20% of adults suffer at some point with chronic back pain, meaning back pain more than 3 months. And in the case of rural and remote people and Indigenous people, 30% higher likelihood of having chronic back disorders. We know that a lot of encounters with general practitioners have chronic back pain as part of the problem. And we heard from the community of Pelican Arrows and the health providers that it's more like 50% of the people that go to the Angelique Canada Health Centre for a concern have back pain as one of their concerns. Very costly, of course, and high morbidity. This work began for me, this is an actual picture of me going out to a rural community. This began in 2012 when I was working as a physical therapist. 2 women from northern Saskatchewan had traveled 12 and 7 hours to come and see me, and one of them had such a desperate problem in her back that had gone undiagnosed that we were now in a position that we had to find a way to keep her in the city for emergent MRI and surgery to say for life-saving purposes. This had gone undiagnosed because of lack of physicians, health staff, and health access to general health care in her northern community. So that was a changing moment for me, and what I've learned is my middle ground moment where I realized, hey, something's really wrong here. What can we do differently? So we began with working with remote presence robotics, which was pioneered in Saskatchewan and in Canada really by Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation. So we used the robot in the facility up north to join a physical therapist from an urban center with the community member and their trusted nurse practitioners or physicians. And this is just a picture of my student doing a practice session with the guiding elders group up there, 8 elders that guide and prepare with all of our work. Okay, so we learned very quickly that that was a really easy process. We could really learn a lot about their back pain using a remote presence robot. Again, this was 2017, so far before COVID pushed virtual care in. Peter Ballantyne was using virtual care and championing it. So we decided to do a year-long communities needs assessment to find out what is it like to live with back pain in the community? What do they think about the remote presence robot, and how would they like us to work with them to use it best? We traveled 4 times to community that year and worked with 8 guiding elders in a circle, did 7 community member interviews with back pain and 8 health providers, most of whom also lived and worked in community. And we travel frequently and still travel frequently there and to PBC and health services in Prince Albert. We collected a whole year full of stories and worked really hard on the analysis, including translating it into Cree and back out into English. And that amazing work was done by Sally Seawap, Elder Rose Dorian, and the late Elder J.B. Dorian, who were members of our team. And many of you will recognize Dr. Veronica McKinney, who is the Cree and Métis Director of Northern Medical Services. How am I doing for time? 2 minutes? Okay. All right, I'm going to go through these quickly. We had 5 themes in Cree. I'll tell you about a couple of them. One of the major themes we heard is that the cultural way of healing hadn't been utilized, especially by the young people. And elders felt that back pain often was coming from the lack of movement on the land and not as much work on the land as they had previously done. We also learned that overcrowding in the homes was a big problem for persistent back pain, difficulty sleeping, etc. And of course, we knew that the incredible length of travel that people were required to do was a problem. So we learned very quickly that they wanted care in Cree, which we knew we would hear, and we've had some exciting developments based on that. One of which is just finished here with Elder Rose Dorian and Sally Siwap, the knowledge keeper, and Tait Zhang, a master's student, who developed a Cree pain scale so that elders and community members could see the words in Cree and use colors and facial expressions that were a bit more responsive to the experience of Cree in their community. So that has finished, and then we have just finished a full year and 100 back pain treatments on the remote presence robot. So from June to June 23, 100 visits of an hour to a half an hour each were completed, and we worked with the elders on outcomes measures that were translated out to Cree and back to English and are a bit more responsive to tell us a bit more about what their experience is like. We collected lots of stories in May and June about what the people's experiences were, and we heard clearly that this community-directed virtual care program allowed a community-based healthcare provision. They told us about their preferences for moving forward to make this sustainable and the experiences. And I think the one over there that I want to share with you, I appreciate the calls I get to the community. So we have an amazing organizer at the Virtual Health Hub with Dr. Mendez that does all of the appointments on the phone and talks and does lots of teaching with folks. For health-wise and mentally and emotionally, it was helpful for them, because if I were to leave today and say I had an appointment in the city, it's 12 hours of travel time. So we've had a tremendous success and are now working with the elders to expand this to all types of musculoskeletal pain, not just back pain, and also in La Loche and Waterhen Lake, and now stretching it out to start some pediatric rehab work with Elder Rose Dorian. The end. That's a lot, hey?
So anyways, I'll talk to you real quick. I know I didn't really introduce myself. I do a lot of research with urban street environments, street gang members utilizing arts-based research and so forth. However, one of the projects that I've been moving on has been the use of digital storytelling with a colleague of mine, Dr. Chelsea Gable, out at McMaster University, and the Story Center in Canada here, which is developing an Indigenous arm, which I see Laura here, so I'm just going to keep pushing towards her. In 2 to 3 years, we're going to be looking at having an Indigenous Story Center, digital story center here and lab here in Saskatchewan. I am going to keep pushing it because I'm going to keep putting in people's ears that we're going to build this, and it's going to happen. But I'm just going to talk about one of the projects. This is the legacy project that we've been working on with our knowledge keeper, Terry, and it's Métis experiences with cancer specifically in this, but it's part of a larger project on the use of digital storytelling and understanding Métis experiences across Canada in of itself. So real quick, what is a digital story? These are stories about 500 to 700 words, where we ask individuals to write a narrative. So we come in. So the first one that we did with individuals from across the Métis homeland was looking at what does it mean to be Métis, and it's intergenerational in its approach. So we're asking youth and adults and seniors and knowledge keepers, what does it just mean to be you? And understanding your space of being Métis. So we just give that out there. We then, individuals have the opportunity to think about, okay, what does that mean to me? What is the story I want to tell? And we ask people to develop 500 to 700 word scripts. Usually they start out at about 4 or 5 pages and we shrink them down because we're not doing a documentary, we're doing very small, short 3 to 5 minute videos here. We also ask individuals when we're doing this through a workshop process, which is usually about 3 days, to what are the images you want people to see? So a lot of my earlier work with street gang members was using photo voice. and where people went and took pictures, and then they would talk about their photographs coming back, and so they controlled that. This is the same thing. It's like, what are the images you want people to see? Because our stories are important, but it's also how we want people to interpret those stories, or what we are thinking about when we're telling our story that we want people to see. And the other part is sounds. What is the important that sound does? So people will sit back and be like, well, I want a Métis jig in the background. Okay, well, then we put a Métis jig in the background. I want to have birds in the background. Okay, well, then we put a bird in there. Did one with some an ex-gang member, and like, what do you want? I want sirens, I want it loud, and I barely want my voice heard. I'm like, okay, I guess that's how we're going to be doing this, but whatever you want. So it's working with people on how to tell their story in a good way. And the Story Center is very, very good at what they do. They work very closely with individuals, and the whole point is providing safe spaces for people to tell their stories. So with this, I'm going to play one quick one so you can actually see, and then I'll talk a little bit more here on what we did for our project out at Batoche. This story is, so you'll see the name on there, Larry Henry. This is my dad, who was part of the first iteration that we did with just identity and what it means to be Métis. He passed away last year. Basically, it's been 1 year, 3 weeks since he passed away from cancer. So it actually relates to the discussion we're having here. And I do want to say he did get a lot of support with that. MNS, Métis Nation, provided support. He had to go to Ottawa, and like, there's no way we would be able to afford to go for an experimental treatment. So I do want to recognize that our communities are doing some things and all of that. But if I can, will the sound work on it? Okay.
I remember when I was a young boy, family gathering together in our small kitchen around the table playing cards, telling stories, teasing, and laughter. The young ones never talked during these times. We just sat on the outside listening to the stories and laughter. When we were younger, we would go and pick berries so we had desserts and treats for the winter. We would also go and get hazelnuts for Christmas. We'd go in the bush watching the squirrels and where they were hiding them. We would go and pick once we found the hiding spots. Dad always reminded us to not take them all, as the squirrels needed them also. My dad also told me about my grandfather and how he was a horse trainer. He would train the horses to do work for the city and other places. One time, a team of milk delivery horses wouldn't cross the train tracks quietly. My grandpa sat there all day working with them until they crossed the tracks the right way. Maybe that's what has drawn me back to horses and the rodeo, those old stories and experiences. I started school where I'd be called an Indian. I was the oldest of my family, so I had to stick up for myself. As I got older, my names changed from Indian to Chief to Louis Riel. Only those that were close to me would be able to use those names when they were talking to me. Racism didn't end for me. It never ends. This summer I was asked if a Mr. Clean cleaner that I was buying for cleaning was the flavor of the month. It hit me again like when I first went to school. The shock and the anger, blatant racism, and how it affects us. It changes over time, but is always there. That's what those who fake will never have to face. I remember about 30 years ago standing up in Métis local meetings, where the year before there would only be about 25 people. There were now 200-300 showing up to meetings. This is when everyone was trying to get their card for hunting, fishing, and education. I believe we should be fighting for our rights. It should be for Métis people, and is definitely not for those who are claiming to be us who are not. I remember standing up in those meetings challenging the leadership, saying we need something better, or we will lose everything. The leadership wanted the numbers to have more power at the MLA at the time. Those conversations are even more important now. We have to have standards of who we are. We have to be able to stand up to those who are trying to take them from us, who are claiming to live like us, but have never had to stand up and fight like I had to when I was younger. We are proud people. We should never be ashamed of who we are. Be proud of where you came from. Hold your standards high as Métis people. Don't make people change who you are, and keep that high standard. Not everyone can be Métis. We live here. We have fought to live here. We will always live here. This is the homeland of the Métis.
So those are what digital stories are. So we can see that they can be extremely powerful ways to talk about that, but we can also analyze that story and see, oh, look at all these themes. And some of you can start understanding, oh, maybe why I say what I say sometimes. There's a reason there with all of that. But the reason why he wanted to do it as well was because he knew he was dying from cancer, and this is his voice to move forward. So this is why he wanted to do it. And so this is why when I brought this to Terry last year, when we were talking about this and what is the project she wanted to do, she's like, well, there's so many people dying up north from cancer. There's so many stories, and they need to be able to get told and to help people, to help shift policy, what is happening here. So what we're looking at doing here with everything, and what we, I just want to go back here, is we were working with Terry specifically to understand what's going on. She's the one who invited us into the community. It was her project, her design, and all that. We're just there to support her. It is part of the larger, like I said, digital storytelling project on Indigenous voices. There's a website up, but I didn't have the website up here. It's going up live here soon, where you'll actually see all the digital stories from all the projects will be up there. And so you can actually start going through and seeing what's happening. So the one, we have this one, we have the intergenerational understandings of Métis. We're also working with Saskatchewan Indian Métis Friendship Center on urban experiences. So individuals moving from the rural into urban who are utilizing those services and so forth moving forward. So when we look at this, for here, and what we did is, again, we actually brought the story center to the people rather than moving individuals, and we did it out at Batoche. And it was an important piece to do because that's a gathering place, a storing place for Métis people. So it had a really big significance, and we were able to bring people down, pay for their, and again, I do want to say digital storytelling is expensive. So it isn't for everything, so you've got to make sure you have the resources and everything else in there. So we brought individuals down from northern Saskatchewan, paid for their hotel rooms, their gas, their food, and everything else. My whole job wasn't actually to do anything except drive vehicles around and fill them up with gas. That was what I did for 3 days. Best time of my life, driving up big trucks and everything else, and all of that. And as you can see, there's a couple of photographs that we have here where they're inside talking with Rani Sanderson and Hiseo. And they were the ones who were doing the stories. The stories are completed. We're supposed to go up to Beauval tomorrow. However, due to some things happening in the communities, they asked us to hold back on it. So that's why I'm not showing any of their stories yet. They haven't gone back to the community yet. So I don't have the right to show that. But my dad is like, whatever, when he was dying, he's like, you show it everywhere you want. So there it is. So with all of that, I do just want to say this is what digital stories are. We're trying to work with communities. It's another research method to think about for a community-engaged research method. And I do have to acknowledge and thank Terry again, because this is her project. It's her thing moving forward. We're just trying to support her to get something that she wants done. So thank you with that. Okay.
Thank you. So I'm here with a colleague, friend, and partner in our research project that we'll share with you today. So again, my name's Sarah Oosman. I'm first-generation Canadian settler, critical ally. Happy to be here today on this beautiful day in these lands that I have the great privilege of enjoying space. Liz, please come introduce yourself as well.
A little bit shorter, so I have to move the mic. I'm Liz DeRocher. I'm originally born and raised in Isle of la Crosse, speaking both the Michif and Northern Michif and Cree languages as well. So I have similar language as Terry here. And I just want to say that I grew up on the land. I grew up speaking the languages. And when I first went to school, all I could speak was Michif and understand that language. So very early on, I was assimilated into the English language with the teachers speaking to me, not knowing and understanding what they were saying. So from there, I started learning and wanted to learn everything really quickly, the language itself and the culture around me, and integrating that with the Cree and Michif language and culture. So I was fortunate to learn from both my parents lived on the land, and my dad would travel around with a trapper's cabin, so we'd move place to place, hunting, fishing, trapping. He also helped build some trappers' cabins out on the land and that sort of stuff. So I was lucky in the summers that we would go out and pick berries, and pick traditional teas and that sort of stuff. So I'm able to pass that on and still practice that today. So again, I'm happy to be doing work with Sarah and some others. I've been involved in research, community research, probably for 10 years now. And that was when I was first introduced to Sarah, Dr. Sarah Oosman, with one of our elders, Marie Fable, up in Isle of Lacrosse. So Sagitawak, where the rivers meet, that's our Cree Michif name in Isle of Lacrosse.
Thanks, Liz. And yeah, I've had a working relationship and really good partnership with the community of Isle Lacrosse for almost 20 years. And it has been 10 almost since you and I have been working together, Liz. And I continue to learn tremendous from things from Liz and other community partners. And much gratitude to Marie Fable and some of the elders that have guided me for a number of years. I have a couple projects that I'm working on. One of them is Kehokatowin, which means visiting, gathering, sharing stories, building on your dad's story there, Bobby, around the kitchen table. And so that's what has grounded our work. I actually am not going to talk about a different project, but I think given all the people here today, I just want to let you know that we're also doing a Team Diabetes project that involves a number of different First Nation and Métis communities. So as that gets started and launched, I think there could be some interesting opportunities for engaging and conversing. So just a little FYI there. And there's a number of co-leads on this project. Liz DeRocher, TJ Roy from the community of Isle Lacrosse, myself, my colleague Sylvia Abney, who has also been working for a number of years in Isle Lacrosse, and then Heather Folds, who I think is joining later today. It's really always important that we recognize the truths and the importance of reconciliation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but TJ and Liz and Sylvia and I were on the Sakitawak lands when we wrote some of these words on this lanyard card that we often share in the spaces that we engage in. It's just a reminder of the relationships, the importance of respect, reciprocity, relevance, and responsibility that we have as researchers, particularly as an individual like myself, non-Indigenous researcher working in hopefully a good way is what our intent is. Liz, this is one of the quotes that Liz and the rest of us worked on that was actually put at the very foreground of our CIHR grant. And Liz, I wonder if you maybe want to read it or speak to it.
So just to recap this quote, Métis people have a vision of building on the strengths of the Métis culture, language, and practices taught to us by our grandparents, our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, and Kehokatowin, visiting one another, ensures that we can pass on our ancestral knowledge in a shared space with the next generation to inform being well and what being well means, and also sharing that knowledge with non-Indigenous people and the partnerships that we create as well. I just wanted to add on to that. No matter where we are, our wellness is linked to our Sagitawak, where the rivers open out, and that's what I said earlier. It's the Cree name, Michif name for our region, our community, Sagitawak lands, and therefore we must maintain the links to our ancestral home in the north, even when we are not even like in that location. So if I'm in Saskatoon, I still have that belief that I'm still, because I'm embedded in the language and culture.
Thanks, Liz. So that actually has grounded. So what I'm going to present, and Liz and I are sharing today, is the launch of a new project. We haven't started Kehokatowin officially yet, but we're just going to start in October, and it builds on work that we've been doing already. Waskawetan, Let's Move, and Taniganawak, they will be leaders. So we've worked across the generations. This is a driven with and by Métis perspective, intergenerational land-based engagement and activities are essential and underpin all that we will be doing. So this is just work that we've done previously, and there's a little bit of a description. There were two young Métis youth who actually developed this logo in partnership, and Liz was very much involved with this part of the work. So we're building on this work, and that's our commitment to ongoing relationship. And I think that is kind of linking into what Caroline Tait was talking about with data sovereignty. How do we do this? And it is relationship over time. So what we learned from Waskawetan, Taniganawak, which was kind of what Liz was talking about in her quote, is that there's a real strong sense of multi-local living. Transportation, caregiving, loneliness have become more challenging for Métis seniors, including also young adults and youth. That there's many individuals, Métis people, shift frequently between homes of different family members within and between northern communities. So this could be a northern community on the land, but also with urban centers and spaces. And these shifts are often in response to impacts of colonization, which can have some negative connotations, but it's also very important to note that it's also multi-local living as opportunities come and strength-based ways of living. In our Western way of thinking in health systems, we sometimes see this movement and transfer between places as not strength-based, but actually from a Métis perspective, it is absolutely linked to well-being and strength-based practice. So being well in place is multi-local. That's what we heard and learned over the previous projects within northern communities and lands as well as urban centers. It's grounded in the desire for ongoing connection to relationship with one another, to the language, the culture, the land, and animals, etc. Intergenerational land-based connection, as I noted, are essential and central to the aspirations to age well in place and to really work on the revitalization in the face of colonization. These are profound and significant for any mainstream Western interventions to truly build our way towards reconciliation, both in research but in practice. So that's what we learned from these other projects. And what we've been working on is also conceptual underpinnings of Cindy Blackstock's Breath of Life theory. This is an Indigenous theory and ecological framework of health and wellness, which you can see in the spheres, color spheres at the top. This is very little. You don't have to really pay attention to this, but the point I'm trying to make here is that this was written and driven by an Indigenous scholar with an invitation to build and continue the work. And so we've been able to adapt and add in Métis perspectives into this, which will again continue to drive. Also nested within this, all of what we're trying to do is grounding the work in an Indigenous worldview and perspective first and foremost, and then we nest in the Saskatchewan Population Health and Research Research Unit, SPHERU, Population Health and Intervention Research Framework. So you can see that kind of at the bottom of the square. So we're trying to build this practice of reconciliation, the coming together of strengths of different worldviews to really inform and drive the work that we're doing in partnership with community members in Isle of Cross. It's a little bit of a theory slide, so sorry if it's boring. So what are our Kehokatowin research objectives? So we've got a project now. We were awarded a spring project grant from CIHR. This is work we'll be doing over the next 4 years. And we really want to look at how does multi-locality shape well-being of diverse Métis people, youth and adults in and across 3 places. So Northern Home Community, Northern Ancestral Lands, and which is in blue in the circle there, and then the city of Saskatoon specifically. We want to reveal how Métis youth and adults aspire to achieve wellness through multi-local lived reality. How do people resource this? What does it look like? And how can we formalize some of these things that are actually often informal and not talked about? And then objective C is looking at identifying interventions that are available but also emerging as we do our project that support multi-local Métis youth and adult well-being in and across places. Do you want to add anything, Liz, at this point?
I just want to add a word in there. It means Mama Wintatan. Let's all gather together. Let's work together in partnership. Let's expand some of our ways of understanding wellness, healing across places, and what your belief systems are and how important that is in this world of work that we live in.
Thank you. So relationships. And the places. So you'll see here there's some photographs of both the Sekitawak lands, the community of Isle Cross, and then the River Valley in Saskatoon. We have partnerships. The Sekitawak Elders Group, Inc. in Isle Cross, and the mayor and council within the village of Isle Cross have always been part of the work that we do. So they're consistent between the work we did before and what we're doing now. And we have new partnerships now with the Meewasin Valley Authority, Andrea LaFond, who's executive director there. We're really excited at opportunities to do land-based work in urban place like Saskatoon. The Saskatoon Public School Division and the Greater Catholic School Division are also part of this work as we look at doing intergenerational teaching that's not necessarily in a context of Western education systems, but trying to, how do we do this in a way that's actually driven and grounded in a Métis worldview on the land with across generations. And then the Saskatoon Indian Métis Friendship Center as well. And it's really important for me to acknowledge, and I have this on the end slide, the work and guidance from Louise Olkey as well, who originates, I think, as well from Isle Cross, but lives here in Saskatoon. So really represents this idea of living in a place, but maintaining connection in the north, and how that shapes and contributes to her health and well-being. So I'll end there, we have Sylvia and I, there's a photo of Liz and TJ and us, that was some time ago, with our work with Weskawaytan, and then Heather Folds is sort of new to our team at this point, recognizing the CHR, the NEIHR, and then all the SPIRU and all the others, and just a few individuals there. So you will see Veronica McKinney on here, works with Stacey. Stacey's on this as well, and a number of other people. So before I close, Liz, would you like to kind of finalize anything, or how are you?
I just wanted to say I introduced a Cree Michif term to the university. I just started a job there with as an Indigenous coordinator with the School of Rehab Science, and I'm quite new. I'm only about a month into the position, but introducing and working alongside some of the school divisions in the region, in the area here for a number of years. I wanted to introduce some of my language and some of our beliefs in the north. So one of the phrases I introduced was Kiamape. So the ones that could speak Cree Michif, they know what Kiamape means. It means settle down, it's okay, take a breather. If you need to, take a step back and go again. So if any closing words, I'll leave that with you today. Marcin and Anaskamun, thank you.
Marcy, thank you.
Yeah, hi, and thanks, Liz. You know, it's funny because the stuff I presented earlier, that's living and breathing, and you know, as I'm listening to Liz, right there's more values, right? More principles, more, you know, that we can add in. So I'm excited that we can talk to you more. A few years ago, about 4 years ago, I switched my research program over to Indigenous, to looking at organ donation and transplantation with First Nations Métis people primarily, but also Inuit. And I was fortunate enough to work with Dr. Mike Moser, who's a transplant surgeon, and we brought together people like Judy Pelly, who's here. I don't know where Judy is. I've lost her in the room back there. Terry Gardner was part of our think tank. We created a think tank of knowledge keepers and elders, and I hope I'm not missing somebody who's here that was on the think tank. I don't think so. And we worked for about 3 years as a group, looking at organ donation and transplantation, and we're very successful, that group, at at capturing the imagination of the transplant community, the medical people. We weren't all that successful, and I'm working very hard at First Nations, Métis, and Inuit health leaders our health leaders are so incredibly busy. So I keep calling up the AFN, I call up others and say, this is what we're working on, but trying to get traction in organ donation and transplantation because there are so many other pressing issues, right? And so, but today, what I would like to talk to you about, so there are areas that we're working on, and I moved to the University of Calgary, so I'm shifting over some of my focus. The think tank no longer meets, and so I'm kind of looking at what does this look like now. But I'm going to talk about one project that I'm working on. But one thing the think tank did is it built collective intelligence where there wasn't. So when we talk to people in our communities about organ donation and transplantation, unless they have a family member who's been sick and needed a transplant, or we're a living donor, most people don't think about it very much, right? So it's not something that you talk about a lot. And I'm working on public education. We're doing an animation piece right now. I'm doing it with two brothers, Craig and Kevin Settee, who are from Manitoba. And Craig, about 10 years ago, gave his kidney to his brother Kevin, who needed a kidney transplant. So that will be coming out. We're working with Sean Muir. Some of you know Sean and the comic books that have been in our communities around education. Training, I need more students, so there's not a lot of students. I don't have any students in the country, so it's a really weird place to be, and we also have an international network that just met last week again, which is Maori from New Zealand and Indigenous people from Australia, Canada, and the United States. And so, but I want to talk to you about one particular project, and that's a project that involves an activist by the name of David Dennis. And so you keep hearing about activists, right? And I think the activists, the people have been really important. Bobby's dad was an activist. Cindy Blackstock is an activist. And so there's many activists, and David Dennis was a New Channel First Nations man from Vancouver who was an activist for many, many years. And he also struggled with alcohol abuse. And he was in the news quite a bit back in 2019 because he needed a liver transplant. And he was denied placement on the transplant list by BC Transplant. And they said that he needed to be abstinent for 6 months, and so that he wouldn't receive a transplant. And so David Dennis, and this is why activism in healthcare is so important. So David Dennis challenged, because he was an activist, he challenged the science and said, show me the science that shows that if I abstain for 6 months, that my outcomes after a transplant will be better. And so BC Transplant came back and said, well, actually, there's been they called it a misunderstanding for why he wasn't placed on the transplant list. And they said, no, actually, the medical evidence does not show if you stop today or if you stop in 6 months that the transplant outcomes are going to be better. And so he was placed on the transplant list, but he, along with the Union of BC Chiefs, filed a human rights complaint. And so that's where I kind of landed on this particular piece of research. And so there's a division of labor amongst researchers that you may not be aware of. So you have people who are in our communities. I would say Willie Ermine, Reg Crowshoe from Calgary, where I'm at, Liz, and others who Dale Turner refers to them as Indigenous philosophers, people who know the language, who know how language and culture and land and space come together. And these are very important people who guide us in our research in all kinds of ways. So those principles, right? I'm not a Cree speaker, I'm not a Michif speaker, I'm not a Dene speaker, but I know the importance of language and situating what we do in language. And then there's other people like myself that's kind of on the spectrum of researchers, and Dale Turner calls us word warriors. So I don't study what First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people do necessarily. I go to them for guidance and advice and that, but I study systems and the ways in which systems are damaging to our people. So in the case of David Dennis, I became really interested in his story because David Dennis, not only did he use his activism to challenge the status quo, and so when I think of the number of our people who are struggling with alcohol addiction or are in recovery and need a transplant, and if they're told we're not placing you on the list, we'll just walk away, and those individuals will pass away eventually because they will not receive the care that they need. And so the argument by David Dennis was that colonialism created the optimal conditions for people who are First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, for all kinds of reasons, including alcohol being used as a colonial weapon, to have high rates of alcohol abuse in communities, meaning that you will also have high rates of alcohol-related liver disease. And then he said, and then you turn around and you blame us for those conditions, and then you deny us the treatment that we need. And so David Dennis, I'm just with Veronica McKinney, writing a paper about the power of his activism. And so David Dennis across the country, I'm headed to Winnipeg next month for the Canadian Society of Transplant meeting, and there is a whole session where they have now looked at the 6-month rule and what it means. So the 6-month rule of alcohol abstinence for someone who's living with end-stage liver disease for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, when you factor in other determinants such as geography, poverty, and other things, is a death sentence. So essentially, this meant that this was a death sentence for our people, and people were dying when there were actually treatments. So with liver transplant, you can actually have a living donation, right? So someone can give you a piece of their liver. So the point I want to leave you with today is that racism in our healthcare system is not as overt as we may think it is. So in the case of David Dennis, the racism against him as a First Nations person who was seen to be someone who was not worth treating or curing, was that, so with Mr. Dennis, is that he brought to the attention not only the equity issues, but he also brought attention to the fact that colonial history matters, and that when you're looking at something called a misunderstanding, right, that he wasn't placed on the list because they just made a little mistake. If we, and this is why data is important, is if we collect how many times those little mistakes happen, right? So to say that what happened to David Dennis was racist, it's really hard in the context of just David Dennis's story, right? And so, but what I am really impressed by his activism is that he continued, and right now the BC Union of Chiefs is still, Mr. Dennis did not receive an organ transplant. He passed away, but the BC Chiefs are still moving forward that human rights complaint. And the reason that they're moving it forward is because nothing has changed. And because what they feel is to draw attention to the ways in which systemic racism happens and the ways in which racism is normalized in the healthcare system, so that even when you are a First Nations, Métis, or Inuit person, you may just accept that you're not on the transplant list because you're not deserving as someone who struggles with alcohol addiction, right? And so the role of this type of research, this type of social justice research, is to really challenge those systems and to push. So again, just my last point, what's really interesting to me is there's a panel at this big national conference talking about this, and David Dennis is erased. David Dennis is not even spoken about now, and they're focused on the utility of the 6-month rule. All of his criticism about reconciliation and addressing the truths of colonization and the impact on the health of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people is erased. So I have 10 minutes there, which I will tell a wee bit of Mr. Dennis's story, just so that he isn't erased. And so I think as we move forward, you know, these activists that we have heard about and the activists that sit here, that we need to make sure that we do not have those voices, their efforts erased. And that is basically, and I'll leave there, that's basically a colonial strategy, which works really, really well. So his motivation, his reasoning, even though it's changed the national context, is erased and pushed aside, and it becomes a problem of everybody and all patients. So thank you.
Thank you for your presentations. It's so amazing to hear what's happening in the Indigenous health research world. Dr. Tait was talking about there's research that really focuses on kind of like challenging the systems that shape those social determinants of health and outcomes in health. I'm curious about how like the funding system, the research funding system kind of like leans or privileges or like how much of it do you think it's of the funding is like going towards those social justice kind of like research projects, and are there any particular like barriers that are very apparent or dynamics with the funding bodies? Is that a question that I can bring up here, or is it maybe a different?
In the area of organ donation and transplantation, there are no First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people in this space. There's Mary Bocage from Nipissing First Nation, who's a patient advocate, and Craig Settee, but there's none of us. Like I go to these meetings. So in that context, you know, it is relatively, you know, that you can get research funding, but it's really important in that context to publish. So trying to publish papers is really important because it's like you're trying to capture the imagination of the Indigenous leadership, but also the transplant people, and just trying to get some space. I also work in the area with Bobby. I've been working on the story. I went to the inquest of a young man that I knew who committed suicide in the federal penitentiary just before COVID. And I went to his inquest, and I'm working on the Curtis, if any of you knew Curtis McKenzie. And so I went to the inquest, and then Bobby said to me, because I'm like, oh, I want to write, you know, and Bobby gave me a book to read that's called Dying from Improvement by Shireen Razik. And I read it, and I went, oh my God, this is brilliant. This is way better than I could do. It's amazing. It says all of the things that's wrong that happens to these young First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who are incarcerated. And I said to Bobby, how come this hasn't made a damn bit of difference, right? And so in the case of Curtis, publication is not where, you know, and I don't even know whether getting research money is so it really, I think it really varies. And I do believe that, I think one of our challenges is that our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit leaders are so damn, like they're so busy. People are so busy. We are busy. Cindy Blackstock spent her whole, basically, career doing something that should have been an easy decision for the government, to fund equitable child welfare. Why do people like her have to spend a lifetime pushing for issues that should be straightforward? And that's part of the problem, is that the colonial system, the systems occupy our times in so many different ways that prevents us from really doing, from really seeing that transformational change, right? And so, you know, I've watched Bobby work for years doing incredible research in the area of incarceration and young Indigenous peoples. And, you know, it's just these little gains that, you know, but we do need to have research. So I don't know if you guys want to, you know.
I probably just have one comment about funding in the rehabilitation space. So as Sarah and I are both physical therapists, but there is a huge gap in funding for things like physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy between the provincial and federal governments. And as a result, in the greatest majority of cases, for example, in the remote north, things like PTOT and speech are just not available at all because they're not funded by either group. So there's a huge hole, and the grant funding is absolutely critical to ensure that we can do the research in a way that uplifts the knowledges in the communities to demonstrate, for example, with e-health or virtual health, what are those technologies best used for? How can they maximize the strengths of the knowledge in the families in communities so that we can then work with folks like the health services of Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation and FSIN e-health, who is here today, and Métis Nation health, so that we can work towards policy to request and advocate for change provincially and federally. So that's the critical role of granting in this work. Is that okay?
I can just add into Manuela. Thank you for your question. Really quickly, from a funding perspective, I think there's change happening. It's slow to come, but it's coming. I know that both of the projects that I have funded in partnership with community leads are through the Canadian Institutes for Health Research, and that is directly through in being informed by one of the institutes, which is the Institute of Indigenous Peoples Health. All sorts of political undercurrents in all of this as we speak, but I think that when I look at the funding that our team secured for diabetes, there were elders on the review panels. There were community members on those review panels, and that change is essential and critical because what that brings to reviewing researcher proposals is a commitment to make sure researchers are accountable to absolutely community-driven, Indigenous-driven priorities. So it's not 100% perfect. I do wear rose-colored glasses, but it's something, and I think it's something to build on. I also just want to recognize the Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation. I know Karen is here from there, and I think there are commitments from funders to do things in a different way. And there, I in the circles that I sort of spend time in, there's change happening. More change needs to happen. And what I will say is looking around the room here and knowing how many people are here today, really looking at working and moving forward in a good way. If we can mobilize knowledge from here into these spaces, it's a challenge, but I think it's possible. I think what the NEIHR's doing is going to support a lot of that. It's going to help really drive and have platforms for funding agencies to look to as a best practice. So I think change still needs to happen, but it's coming. It's my perspective, but yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, Liz, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I guess in closing, I just wanted to add how important our languages are in our culture and our spaces in that we live and work in, and how that can bring out the best health outcomes, you know, when we explain and do things in our areas as well, you know, with researchers coming in. And I think overall, you know, even the elders, the older adults in our communities understand firsthand when we have local people involved, in explaining that in the language is really important and key.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you.
So stressful. I just got an email that my Tim Hortons card is expiring. My points. I may have to go on a trip to town. Is that going to cause your teeth to grind? Yeah, I'm going to be grinding my teeth.
I just wanted to talk about One Health for a real hot second. One of the things we're struggling with right now is trying to support communities in accessing funds to, you know, achieve some of the things they would like to achieve when it comes to community health and safety as it intersects with dogs primarily. And one of the things that we've said as our team is like we can be the wordsmiths and how to frame this as a community health and safety initiative, but very often we don't have a lot of traction from funders, with the exception of SHRF. Thank you, SHRF, for being amazing the last 6 years. A lot of traction when it comes to like anything to do with animal health and the intersection between that and human health. And so I guess my question is about, what thoughts folks on the panel have about, how some progress can be made in that regard, because, again, we all know that there are very many priorities when it comes to community health in First Nations and Métis and Inuit communities, and dogs are always one of them, but there are a lot of gaps. People have a difficult time figuring out how to move forward with that. So I'd be curious about people's thoughts.
I don't know. Like, I wonder if it's really building the relationships and having the conversations, looping into teams, maybe taking advantage of some of the funding that the NEIHR is able to mobilize and provide to almost do like similar to what you're probably referring to, like the grants that spark ideas and bring people together to share. And I think, I know you and I have talked about this. It's a matter of resourcing and time, I think, often. But Liz, from your community perspective, any thoughts on how to link with researchers and practitioners like Jordan?
Well, I think the partnerships created with the town councils and community-based organizations like friendship centers and stuff. I know in Isla Cross they have, now I'm not sure where the funding comes from, but I think it's through the village office, Northern Village Office. They have a person working with the stray dogs and the problem with the dogs in our community. And so every dog now needs to be registered and through the village office, and University of Saskatchewan comes up, in a courtesy, that's you, awesome, to come and get the dogs all spayed and neutered at no cost to the community members. And also that, pet owners, I guess, are more, now that it's been ongoing for a number of years, are more, like keeping their dogs at home, keeping them tied up. You don't see as many. There's still some, but we have a dog catcher, and their dogs get locked up, and they're given chances. But it's part of this process of education, bringing awareness, all that fun stuff, because if we don't have that, then it still continues to be the same.
Just one more thing, and then I'll pass it along. I was just thinking too, Jordan, like from our Waskawetan Taniganewak work, a lot of what was talked about as well is this ability for Métis people in the community to maintain food security through living on the land, procuring foods locally, whether it be through fishing, hunting, berry picking. And so I wonder if there's a way, as you look at a project that has One Health implications, but human health included in that, and how that might actually interface, and you tease out some of that as a secondary component to a project or something, but coming at it from food security, but also safety, as you said, people safety, just a little extra thought.
Just maybe a comment about the two grants that Bobby mentioned, Community Partnership Grant and Knowledge Translation, and how One Health is impacted in our back pain, for example. We know that walking is one of the hands down most important things for prevention and management of back pain. Yeah, and from our last communities needs assessments in Pelican Arrows and Laloche, one of the most common things we hear is the inability to walk because of the dog packs and the safety concerns. And so a definite link between what you're talking about. So when I think of those two grant opportunities that Bobby mentioned, the community partnership grant would be an ideal one, for example, for you to start engaging experts in the communities to talk about this and make a plan for more granting. And then the knowledge translation grant is super useful for the educational pieces. What types of education do we need? Stories developed, or graphics or cartoons for the children? And that's the knowledge translation grant. And so as an example for us, we identified in work with FSIN, they helped us to understand that we need to work with their Knowledge Keepers Circle on a certain number of things. So we developed a community partnership grant for that piece specifically, and it was really just for relationship development. So if that helps, I think those two grants are actually probably very well suited to what you're talking about.
And so I'll just add a little bit, and that is that we shouldn't forget that the narrative of dog ownership and the narrative of dogs on reserve particularly is a narrative that reinforces negative stereotypes about First Nations, particularly First Nations peoples. And we shouldn't be naive to think that this is happening, and it is a way that diminishes and again puts this othering of First Nations Métis people in the province. That being said, is that we should also be cognizant that during COVID, we had a rush on dogs, and everybody, all these dogs were adopted, and right now across Canada, there's dog shelters that are full of dogs that non-Indigenous people have decided, and they have the luxury that they actually have shelters where they can drop the dogs off and everything. So I think as we proceed, and there's a whole history of Indigenous people and dogs, and the relationships and the utility of dogs, and what happened, like for instance with the Inuit, of the slaughtering of the dogs in the north, right? So there's all kinds of history that's there that underlines everything that we're talking. So I agree with everybody what has been said, but this is also used as a way to diminish and to stigmatize Indigenous people as not being people who are responsible and who can care for in this case a dog, right?